morning, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Heather Rotterman, and I'd like to welcome you all to our MAP NWEA Growth Remote Planning Guidance. I'm joined today by two folks from NWEA, Jeannie Oliver and Pam Jones, and I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. We are going to ask today that you use the chat bar for questions, as there will be time that Jeannie and Pam will answer questions throughout the presentation. But go ahead and use the chat bar, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Please follow, so hopefully you were able to follow the directions on the screen and everyone has joined us. We are looking forward to communicating with all of you, and as Heather said, please put in the chat, if possible, your name and district along with your chat questions so that if we need to get back a hold of you, we are able to do that. So I, along with my colleague, Jeannie Oliver, are thrilled to have you join us today, and we are excited to support our Michigan partners throughout this year. We also want to take time to thank Heather and Michelle for setting up this opportunity and next week's repeat opportunity. My name is Pam Jones, and I am the account manager for the East Side of Michigan. I joined NWEA team just over a year ago after retiring with 32 years in K-12 public education. During that time, like many of you, I wore many hats. Teacher, professional development facilitator, school improvement chair, elementary principal, K-12 curriculum and assessment, and eventually retired as assistant superintendent. Jeannie is joining us today as our strategic account manager who supports not only Michigan partners, but 4 other states across the Midwest. She has 15 years of experience in education, including teaching, curriculum design and alignment, and professional learning facilitation. She is our go-to person for sharing best practices from across the country and helping provide necessary resources and support to help all kids learn. Our goals today are to give you a brief overview of each of these topics, but most of all, we want to leave you with great resources to start your school year with. We will be presenting for the first 40 to 45 minutes, but then we will have plenty of time for questions and answers in the middle and at the end. Please feel free to add any questions you think of into the chat as we go along. We are hoping you will leave here today feeling very confident for you and your district to be able to successfully assess your students and develop learning plans centered on maximizing instructional learning time in a remote environment. Thank you, Jeannie. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Many key educational institutions are strongly encouraging districts to rely on key achievement and growth data this year as we return to school after the lengthy closures this spring. To start us off, we want to quickly review some of the key NWEA research done this past April by Dr. Megan Kufeld and Dr. Beth Tarzawa. Some of you may have been a part of this webinar. This research highlights student achievement projections that indicate students returning to school this fall after the closures could have substantially lower achievement levels than teachers typically plan for. To create these forecasts, a national sample of over 5 million students in grades 3 through 8 who took MAP growth assessments were used to estimate the potential impacts of COVID-19 related school closures. We expect that classrooms will be a changed landscape, one likely marked by larger equity gaps, substantial learning loss for many students, and continued economic turmoil for our most marginalized families. During this time of uncertainty, school closures, remote learning, and hybrid schedules, we know you are balancing a myriad of priorities to ensure the well-being of your students and families. At the same time, you're trying to support your teachers who are challenged with figuring out the best way to engage students in a distance learning environment while facing a wide array of instructional levels in their classroom. Based on our recent research, a typical 5th grade classroom this fall may span over 7 grade levels, with over 65% of the students performing below grade level. This extreme academic variance will call for tremendous flexibility and scaffolding to support instruction. We want to ensure at the same time we have a strong core curriculum based on grade level standards while ensuring that we have support for meeting individual needs. It is vital that teachers have access to reliable data to show where each student is at as they come back to school this fall. MAP Growth will help you maximize instructional efficiency to help students close the gap. MAP Growth will group students for differentiation and help teachers target areas for intervention. This will be key this year. As an adaptive assessment, we are different than many other assessments in that we don't limit the grade levels that a student can be assessed. Our adaptive assessment spans the entire K-12 spectrum, whereas other assessments typically only go up or down 1 or 2 grade levels. We will continue to adjust and pinpoint where students are truly at to ensure that you can provide instruction both on grade level and off grade level. And Jeannie will talk later about how we're going to connect this to many instructional resources to help you provide some of that individualized learning. NWEA has virtual and international schools that have been testing remotely for many years. With spring closures, we had to begin supporting districts like New York City, who were eager for and in need of spring testing data. We successfully tested over 400,000 students last year. Our research team is currently studying the results from this remote testing and planning to share those out soon. Here's what we have learned so far. In New York City alone, over 7,800 students tested remotely, very successfully, with over 13,000 tests administered in 54 different schools. Of these, over 1,000 of these students were completely new to MAP Growth. The results are overwhelmingly successful. Students stayed engaged, completed the assessments in approximately the same amount of time, and their scores were in line with what teachers had expected based on their previous trajectories. The takeaway from this is that you too will be successful. So no more than anything else today, we want you to leave here today feeling very successful or very able to be successful at remote testing. This is not that different than what you've done in the past. So the keys to remote testing are thinking about what stays the same and what is different. What stays the same is that rostering is similar, proctoring is similar, test sessions are similar, test actions are similar. Teachers and administrators don't need to learn a lot of new processes. What is different is just like the things that were different this last spring as you did remote learning. We need a way to communicate with students because they're not sitting right in front of us. Students need a way to access the test login page, and they need to be able to support administrators or proctors or teachers need to support students off screen. And we need to involve our families in a much bigger way than we ever have before. So I know that you all know why MAP growth data is important. But do all of your stakeholders clearly understand the purpose of giving this assessment? Can all of your teachers and proctors clearly communicate this purposefulness to parents, students, and families? Can they, without hesitation, tell parents it is essential to identify where students are at so we can ensure that we create the most meaningful lesson plans going forward? That is going to be key. Parents need to understand why you're giving this assessment. Laying the groundwork for purpose and intent to testing is to ensure integrity. Front-loading shared messages around the purpose of MAP growth will provide much needed clarity. So it's important that your parents understand how long the test is and they're going to get scores for an overall score and individual subject scores and goal area scores, that the test is untimed, but that students shouldn't take forever to take it. They need to, most importantly, understand what a computer adaptive test is. And we've created lots of parent pieces to help you explain this. So computer adaptive tests, they need to understand if they're looking over their third grader's shoulder, that their third grader may see 7th grade questions and may see 1st grade questions. And that's okay. If that happens, they shouldn't jump on and help their student. They also need to understand, just like all the red marks on this page, their child is going to get approximately 50% of these questions wrong. And that's okay. If their student is getting things wrong, they shouldn't jump on to help them. So if they understand those 2 key pieces, that is essential in helping ensure that parents have the right approach while their child is testing. We also need to know, why is the test as long as it is? Because that's a typical question. Can't we shorten the testing time? The reason the test is as long as it is that we have 3 portions to this test. The beginning part of the test is when students are very quickly adapting up or down at pretty big differences to kind of zone in on their zone of proximal development. In the middle phase of the test, students are honing in on balancing out all of the different goal areas. So we think about in mathematics, there's 4 goal areas. We need to have an array of questions across all 4 of those areas in order to have accurate projections to the state test. And in the last part of the test, you can see on this graphic, it's really zoning in very closely on having a very small standard error. We want to ensure that we are accurately identifying where kiddos are at, so we do not misidentify them either for intervention or not for intervention. That is a very expensive process to identify too many kids or under-identify kids, and we want to make sure that we're correctly identifying students. And the last piece that I want to talk about right now is family communication. So all those things we just talked about, ensuring parents understand purposefulness, they understand what the test is like, they understand adaptability, they understand why the test is as long as it is. We need to be able to communicate those things. So we have created an entire group of resources for you. We have sample parent letters. We have a parent toolkit where they can watch a 1-minute video on what MAP growth is like. We have preparation materials that help you and your proctors know what to tell parents ahead of time, what to tell parents on the day of the test. But we've created sample materials for you to adapt, put your own logo on, change, make yours to fit your needs. But we've done that all in a way to ensure that you are ready for preparing parents. So quick review. Number 1, set purposefulness. Make sure all stakeholders, families, parents, proctors, teachers understand purposefulness. Number 2, make sure people understand key resources or key characteristics of the test, that it's out of grade level questions, that it's adaptive, and the length of the test. And 3, have a communication plan for parents before, during, and after testing. So we're going to talk a little bit more as we talk about proctors about what that might look like. So at this point, we'd like you to go into the chat and quickly mention how you've already been successful with communicating with teachers and students, or how teachers have communicated with students. I'm so sorry. So this past spring, what was your communication tool that teachers have already used and felt pretty successful about?
So Pam, we're getting lots of responses. Thank you, everyone. Lots of Zoom, Google Classroom, Remind. Dojo, text chat, phone, I mean, from the gamut. So we're seeing all spectrums of the gamut here. Excellent. Thanks everyone for responding.
Yes, thank you so much for responding. And that is so important because one of the key pieces, go ahead, Jeannie, to setting up the technical side of this remote testing is that we want to make it as familiar and easy for you and your teachers as possible. So as opposed to changing to a whole new test and a whole new environment and a whole new platform and whole new instructional resources, we want to keep as much the same as possible. We have heard loud and clear from educators across the country that there has been so much change that people are overwhelmed with change. So let's think about those things that have already worked. And we're going to keep using the things that have already worked and worked well for you. And we're just going to grow and build on those same processes. So taking MAP growth remotely looks like this graphic. Basically, in this graphic, you can see in the purple, there is a teacher who's sitting at a desk looking at a proctor screen, just like that teacher and that proctor do in school when they're giving the test in school. That doesn't change. What changes is on that desktop, you can't really see, but there's two little boxes. There's a big box and a little box. So the big box is going to be the proctor screen that they've always used to monitor how kids are doing on the test. And the little box is going to be your Zoom or your Google Classroom or your chat box or whatever way you've been communicating with kiddos. Because during the test, the big difference here is that that teacher can't get up and walk over to a student testing to know how to communicate and have that relationship building piece with that student. So we're going to want to build in pieces that help that teacher be able to communicate as they see things that are going on with the student testing. How can they communicate with the student and possibly with the student's parents? So you see in the blue, the student is taking the test remotely, again, with two screens open. They have the browser to take the test and a chat box to communicate with their teacher. And there's possibly a parent or a family member standing over their shoulder watching. And so we want to prepare for both of those scenarios. In between, you have your tech department and the MAP growth suite. So your tech department, like they've always done in school, is going to ensure that your tech devices are working. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And I see the question coming in for iPads, and we're going to address that in just a minute too. So key that I showed you in that picture was the teacher is key to remote testing. The reason that is so important is because we at NWEA value the power of the relationship of the teacher. We do not want to be in the business of creating things that leave teachers out of the loop. Education is about the relationship of teachers to students. That's the magic that happens in the classroom. And we want to build on that in assessments. Teachers are equally as important in assessments. So students are going to basically use a regular browser. We are not going to be using the lockdown browser. And we're going to talk about reliability and validity of testing without a lockdown browser. Now, the difference is K2, so the question came in about iPads. And unfortunately, at this point, iPads or iOS do not support having two screens open at one time. I can tell you a little side note, iOS is working on that. Because of this world of remote teaching and learning, they have heard loud and clear that they need a way to fix that. So they are working on coming up with a new fix for that, but we don't think that will be ready for fall testing. So we're going to talk about how, if your students were using iPads this spring for remote learning, how did the teacher communicate with them while they used the iPads for learning? So think through those same communication tools. Possibly there was an email that on a separate device, maybe the parents are helping by emailing on their phone. Maybe there's a chat or a text messaging going on, but you're going to probably need two devices to communicate when there's iPads. And that's okay, because with those littles, you probably have more parent involvement anyway, just like you had more parent involvement in the Zoom classrooms or the remote learning that was going on in the spring. So think through what that parent piece was in the spring and build on all those successful pieces now. Most importantly, we have a very extensive remote testing administration guide. There's pieces in there for your tech department, and there's pieces in there for you as an administrator. But we have tried to answer every possible question you may have for every possible device, because we did test 400,000 kids successfully on a variety of devices. So as questions came in, we were compiling FAQs all spring long to make sure that we could meet the needs of everyone possible. So tech devices, we can support pretty much any tech device that you have had. I think the key here is to think about, is your district, have you given the devices to students? Are they your devices? If they're your devices, then your tech department is probably very confident that there is going to be no problem giving MAP growth assessments. You've always had it work on those devices. They're used to running those devices. Those devices are prepared to run MAP growth assessments. Now, if students are using their own devices, we have built in this really amazing tool that you can send to students at home. And of course, your older students, your middle and high school students who are very techy. Go ahead, Jeannie. Who are very techy can run this themselves, or you can send it to your little ones with a parent or a family caregiver to run it on their device. And basically this check.nwea.org runs a check on their device to ensure that their device is ready to run MAP growth. And so it runs through the whitelist, it runs through the device. We're looking for resolution, we're looking for pop-up browsers, and then it walks through a step-by-step process of how to fix those issues if those are on the device the student is using. But again, this probably isn't as necessary if they're your devices. This is more necessary if students are using their own devices. And then we get this great thing at the end. After they run this check, they know if the device is working or not working. And I see a question has come in about the remote testing guide. It is on our website, and we're going to give you all those resources today. Okay, so last but not least, our biggest suggestion, like anything else done well, you want to do a dry run. You wouldn't put on a big play at the high school without making sure that you did a practice before you started. So our biggest suggestion is that we've built in our quick little short practice test. So if you set up your test sessions and the teacher sends out information on a test session and says, you know what, we're going to do a dry run the day before, and we're going to have everybody log on. A, that makes sure that their technology is working. B, they can log on and do the practice test, which only takes a couple of minutes. And if then they get to see what the test looks like and what it's like, and you can answer questions from that end. And then the last but not least, if they can run the practice test, they can run the regular test. So then you know for sure before you log on to that test session that everything is going to work well. So I have had a couple of questions come in from some of my partner districts about, I don't know about this remote testing. I think that I'm really worried about validity. I don't think the scores are going to be accurate. We don't think this is going to come back correctly. We have to tell you from our preliminary research this spring, that is not true. We are very confident in the validity of this test, even done remotely at home. So the key to MAP growth that makes us different than many other things out on the market are we have some built-in pieces to ensure validity. Number one, we have our rapid guessing feature. So your proctors are used to seeing this rapid guessing feature, and we're going to be looking for students who are rapid guessing as they're taking the test. So just like if they were in the class taking the test, teachers would have this proctor screen. This is what their proctor screen looks like. And they would be seeing that kids are rapid guessing, and then you would want to communicate with that child. So in class, I would get up and walk over to them, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you're happy clicking. We need to really be paying attention to what we're doing. Why don't we take a little 5-minute break and pause the test and let the kid come back at it? After that, go ahead, Jeannie. We also have ways to download that list of rapid guessing. So We can get a complete list of which students are recommended for retesting, which we don't recommend retesting. We recommend catching kids as they're rapid guessing. As they get the first sloth that comes on, we stop them and talk to them and explain that they need to be engaged and on the test. So this is going to be the same thing you're going to do, only in a remote environment. You're going to use that chat that you have set up, however you're chatting with that student, to say, hey, buddy, I can see that you're just really happy clicking. Let's stop and pause, take a little break, and we're going to come back at this because I really need you to do your best work. And then the next thing we also have is in our student profile report, we have this great piece of information, and this has always been there. This is a report we want teachers to be very comfortable using and going to on a regular basis. But on that student profile report, it not only tells us their standard error, which is really, really important. We want that number to be small, between 3 and 4. If it's getting up much higher than that, then we want to think about, is this kid happy guessing all over the place? We want to look at the next step, Jeannie, is to look at minutes that they've taken the test. So again, one of the questions that come in about validity is, what if kids are cheating by going to sites and looking up answers? Well, we expect this test to take students about 60 minutes, 50 to 70, kind of depending on the age and the ability of the student. Believe it or not, students who are very high ability and reading at high levels will actually take slightly longer because their reading passages are longer. But it should be between 50 and 70 minutes. They should not be taking extraordinary amounts of time to take this test. If they are, that's a really good indication that they're stopping every question to look up the answers. And on that Proctor screen, I didn't point it out on the Proctor screen, but you can see Proctors are watching. Joey's on question 5, Susie's on question 10, Amanda's on question 15. If you have a student who is only on question 5 when the rest of the class is on 25, that's a problem. We're going to want to stop during the testing, communicate with that child and say, hey, what's going on? Why is it taking you so long? You're still only on question 5. Can I help you with something? What's happening? Because if you see them as they're testing, taking extraordinary amounts of time, that's a really good indication that something is happening that we want to address. So these are great ways to know that your test is very valid and your results are very valid. And like I've said multiple times, we are seeing really good results out of the 400,000 students that remote tested this spring. So quick review, we do need to talk about rostering students. So rostering is the same as it has always been. Many of you are already using an automatic roster process. You're going to use that same process. If you're not, we want to talk to you about how could we help you set that up, because that would make your life much easier. And Jeannie and I can both help you do that. And we want to make sure that when we're rostering kiddos, we encourage people to use UICs, only because that does help sometimes as students move from district to district. And we know that in Michigan, we have a lot of transient students. What we do need to look at is, I'm sorry, go back, Jeannie. Thank you. User roles and access. So some of you, as we're talking to districts, we have realized that there's a lot of people changing roles and changing districts right now. We have a lot of administrators and teachers kind of moving around. So please have whoever is in charge of your rostering and your user roles, double check that. Make sure that if you have a new tech director, please send to Jeannie or I their name and contact information. We want to make sure we are communicating directly with tech directors. If you have new people in other roles, please make sure you've given them access before school starts. I know there's a lot of moving parts right now all at one time. And as I talk to districts, a lot of times those are actually people changing roles. And we want to make sure that the right people have access to the right things before school starts. But this is the same as always. So technical setup review. Let's make sure we establish a communication plan with families before, during, and after the testing. That's super important. Make sure that we establish device readiness. If they're your devices, again, we're not really worried about them. But if they're the students' devices, we want to run that device check. we want to do a practice run, which is a really great idea for everything. And then we want to make sure that our rosters are set up and ready to go before school starts or before that you're ready to test. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie here in a minute, but then we can pause for a second, answer any questions too.
Yeah, there's actually a number of questions that came in, Pam. Thanks so much for pausing. So one of them is, Phyllis, thank you for your question. How do we see the list of students who may need to be retested?
So that is a great question, Phyllis. So on that Proctor screen, there is in the top right-hand corner, and if you want to scoop back, Jeannie,
Yeah,
we
okay.
can scoop back to that page and I can actually show them. And many of you are not proctors, so you're not familiar with the Proctor screen, but your teachers who have been proctoring for years really are. So when they finish testing, the teacher needs to click a button that says End Test Session on this page. So they're going to click this green button up in the top corner, top right-hand corner. Prior to that, we highly suggest proctors go to this session details, and there's a download button, and they can download the session details and print it. That session details will tell them how long students took to take the test, what their percentage of rapid guessing was, and suggest which students possibly need to retest.
Excellent, thanks. And I'll also, in my section that I'll be talking about is proctoring. So this will come up again. So we'll reiterate. I just won't go into as much depth. Okay, just FYI, the PowerPoint, the resources, and the recording will be available shortly after today. Heather and Michelle is going to work on their end to get that recording out as fast as possible. And we'll provide the links to the slides. So no worries, look for that probably early next week. And if you don't receive it, please reach out to either Heather, Michelle, or Pam and I, and we'll make sure to get it to you. So a question from Alexis. The expectation is that the student will have to be videoing at the same time as testing. So that way, just in case they need a pause, take a break, or communicate with the student. Is that what we're suggesting, Pam?
No, not necessarily. So they don't need to be videoing. They just need some kind of chat open. So if the student wants to take a break, they can send an email or a text message or a Zoom chat to their teacher that says, hey, can I take a 5-minute break? Or, hey, my mom needs to use my computer for a few minutes. Can I take a 20-minute break? Or whatever they need to do. They just need to be able to chat that to their teacher, and their teacher can pause right on this Proctor screen. The teacher pauses the test, the student takes their break and comes back, and they unpause the test, just like they do if the child was in school. So no videoing. You don't necessarily need to videotape kids while they're taking the test. That it's just not necessary.
Excellent, thanks. And your question's valid, Alexis, is what if parents read the test to their student? And that's where Pam was saying that communication is key to parents and students on the purpose of this assessment, and being very upfront saying, I've even had some partners in Arizona, because they've started school 3 weeks ago, say, parents, we know you care and you want your kids to do well, but we want to know what they know and what they don't know. If you read the test to them, you're actually doing a disfavor, right? So being as clear and concise, obviously in the language that you feel is best suited for your community, but letting them know, hey, really the purpose of this is to find out what they do know and what they don't, so we can adjust our curriculum accordingly. Anything you want to add to that, Pam?
Yeah, so and like Jeannie just said, I think it's really key at a district level. You're going to want to send out some communications that are using a certain type of language that meet your community's needs. But remember that teacher has a relationship with their parents and their students. And at that level, when they're saying things to parents and saying things to students, to me, the key is simply to say, you know, I'm going to use these results to make lesson plans. When I do that, if you've helped your child, my lessons are going to be way too hard. And we don't want that. You know, we want to make sure that this data helps us design really great lessons for the year and meets your child's needs. And when you help them, that's not really helpful, even though you think it is.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And keep in mind this, something that prior to this test, the hope is that the first 2-3 weeks, your teachers are connecting with their students in some way. And as they're connecting with them virtually or possibly uh, in school with the hybrid model, they're establishing a communication process with those students. So if they do take the test virtually or remote, then that means that they've practiced through the communication protocol prior to taking the test. So those the first to third week or whenever you're going to be taking the test, if the teachers can walk through a communication protocol, that'd be great.
And I see this great question. What does it look like for kinders and first grade students who can't read or write in the chat box and parents don't speak or read English? And I really think that may be true for lots of kinders, even if their parents do speak English. And I think, again, that really comes down to what worked for you this spring. So when you were thinking about working with kindergartners and first graders remotely, that was a huge challenge and a huge lift for our teachers. And I do know many districts did it in a variety of ways, but the teachers that I'm good friends with, a lot of them had very creative ways to, started off with a parent meeting, started off with, creating some simple tools for their students in a communication. Maybe that's a first word we teach them is pause or break or whatever you want that keyword to be. That they can use, that they then know, okay, this is the word I'm going to type. I might not really know what that word means, but this is what I'm going to send to my teacher if I need to stop or stop. So whatever you think is going to work for your students, but definitely that piece of how did you communicate well in the spring and what worked for your little ones then, and use those same things and build on it.
Perfect.
What if I see you, Jeannie? That's a great question.
I know, I was just typing to her.
I really appreciate that question because you know what? Sometimes in education, we are so known for using acronyms and just flying through them. ICU stands for Instructional Curriculum. And so we connect with a variety of curriculum resources. So we want to make sure that whatever you're using right now, if it's Reading A to Z or Newsella or Khan Academy or IXL or a variety of things that people are using to help students do individual learning, we're going to help you connect your data. So little Susie's data is uploaded to that program, and then that program creates a specific path for them, not just a generic path that all the kids are doing the same things.
Excellent point. And then some of these questions we'll get to as I go into the next section about proctoring. She said, Thomas, instead of stopping through a test, why not give 5 to 7 minutes for bathroom breaks or etc. They've taken the test. So it's a great point to make, that setting up that communication and the process. One of the reasons why we, and Pam alluded to this already, take a practice run with your students or encourage that with your teachers and ask, hey, you guys, would it be best to, this is what a break looks like, and let's plan on taking that break at this time during the test. So establishing that prior to the actual test day would probably be helpful. And or if you have those students that will need breaks, again, that teacher or the proctor can reach out to that individual student prior to the test and say, I know that you're going to need some time to take breaks, so let's establish this. And just, again, communicating with the student prior, and also their caregiver or guardian. Great. So let's go ahead. I also want to honor everyone's time. Keep the questions coming as we go through this part. So as we are thinking about proctoring, one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves is, who do you plan on having proctor remotely? This is where we can be a little bit more creative, being that our test sessions are flexible. So I'll go into more detail on that. But in the chat box, if you want to go ahead and share out, who do you plan? Will it be teachers? Will it be your support staff? Your previous proctors, whether that's administrators or yourselves. But yeah, feel free to share who are you thinking that will be proctoring this next year or this upcoming year. As we're thinking of proctoring, we, as Pam alluded to already, are suggesting have a game plan. We're sure that's what you're joining us today for that, and you'll continue to work on that game plan. Here's some suggestions. One, if all possible, keeping your sessions small, and also keeping in mind your proctor's technology comfortability. So you do have some proctors or teachers that are comfortable having multiple different screens or being multi-active. What's that word I'm thinking of, Pam? Goodness, it's Friday morning. Being able to be versatile with multiple areas onto the dashboard of their screens. So keeping the sessions small for some of the teachers will be beneficial. One, because they get a chance to communicate with the students, establish that protocol piece, and the students, some students will feel a little bit better knowing that it's not an entire class taking this test with them. So just FYI on that. We're not recommending of recording sessions, and then we don't recommend that proctors share their dashboard to their students. The other thing is, just so that way proctors know, is setting up a flow chart of support. So we are here to support you and your teachers. We're not here to support the parents, but we have a ton of resources to provide to you to support your parents and your community. So with that said, we've had partners create a flow chart. In fact, I just was on a phone call yesterday with a school in Tucson, Arizona. They start testing on Monday. What they've done is they've taken their support staff and literacy specialists, and they've trained them on the common tech issues. So what they're going to do is they're going to team up with their teachers that are proctoring, and if those teachers have any issues, they reach out to that group of support staff. So that's their flow chart. So that's one of the things we do recommend, is creating that support tech flow chart. Next is monitoring test progress. Pam alluded to this earlier. On the proctor screen, your proctors are going to be able to see what questions the students are on. How's the pace, right? These are the things as being an active proctor remotely is looking at. And then also checking test progress. We have heard from some partners saying that they're going to give an hour and a half for the students to take the test, and they are forthcoming with that information to the students in the beginning. And they say, hey, if you don't finish within that time, we will have a makeup session on this date, and having those makeup sessions already determined is extremely helpful. Third, communication plan. The students being muted, so that way, of course, action if you're on a video conference. If it's in a chat or breakout room, establishing with the proctor to the student individual communications to students versus the entire class, having their proctor understand those differences. And then lastly is that trial run. We've been hearing when schools go through a trial run or a practice test, it eliminates 80% of the issues. So just 3 game plan suggestions as you look into proctoring. Now, earlier I was speaking of how you could have your support staff, your literacy specialists, your special ed. Anyone can proctor as long as they go through the the training of it because our test sessions are flexible. In other words, the data is not shown when they take the test. The data is only provided to the classroom teacher or whoever has access in working with that student. So with test sessions, that means it could be a flexible group of students. Yesterday, a large district in Phoenix, Arizona said what they're going to do is they're going to test their secondary team. They're going to open it up in a large test session, and they're going to have breakout rooms where there's proctors will be in those breakout rooms. So they all have the same test session information, but will be proctoring in breakout rooms. So again, some ideas here. We wanted to let you know that test sessions are not connected to reports, so that test results do follow the student and not the test session. I hope that was clear. If you have any questions, throw those in the chat box or the Q&A. As you're working through your proctoring protocols and having these sessions, getting your teachers prepped for this, wanted to just highlight some tools again. One is that family guidance letter that Pam showed earlier. Secondly, device readiness resources. So we've created a video walkthrough that you can send to your students, and it actually walks them through to check their device. Now, oftentimes, the devices that you've handed out to your students are already compatible, but just in case, we always suggest doing a check device readiness before the test. This is also the same kind of device readiness check, but this is an exercise for the students to go through. So if the teacher with a group of students want to walk through this with them, a day before or 2 days before, there is an actual exercise that teachers can walk through. We've also designed and created a Proctor slide deck that you can download and customize for your teachers, your proctors, so that way the day of, they have it all created for them. And on the Proctor slide deck, there's also common tech issues, and we've singled them out one slide at a time. So just in case the teacher needs to get to those common issues, it's right at their fingertips. We've also created a pre-test checklist for your proctors. Everything is hyperlinked to all of our resources and videos. So our hope in creating these is that you don't have to take the time to recreate the wheel. Now, if you find something that is not listed here that you would be extremely helpful, please let us know. That's how these resources have been created, is by conversations with you and letting us know what you need. So earlier we talked about the proctor screen. So here is what the proctor screen looks like. Being an active proctor, as we've pointed out already, is in the middle of the screen. You can see that we have the student's last name, first name, whether they're testing or if they've completed the test, the number that they are on currently, the test that they're taking, and then if they have any accommodations turned on. And then lastly, the column there is rapid guesses. So again, this is the proctor screen that your proctors will see. So with the rapid guesses, we get a chance as proctors to see, okay, this student is not disengaged. They're answering their questions too fast. It'll inform the proctor by that red exclamation point and actually pull up a box on the proctor screen saying this child or this student you might want to engage. They are rapid guessing. So at that time, the proctor will need to communicate with that student. So let me walk through what that looks like. So rapid guessing or behavior is when a student guesses a test item within 10% of the average. So yes, we have an algorithm that informs us the average time it takes to answer a test item. And if the student answers that test item within 10% of the average, it'll be flagged as a rapid guess. Now, if they rapidly guess more than 2 to 3 within a session, then it'll pause their screen. And what will come up on their screen is the sloth. So once they get the sloth, what a teacher or the proctor needs to do is they need to communicate with the student via chat, probably, right? If you're remote. So in your chat box to that student, Johnny, I'm seeing that you are going a little fast. Share with me, do you need a break? Share with me, were the test items, did you know of them? Do I need to remind you that some of them are going to be difficult? You will get half right, half wrong. So once the student and the teacher believes it's ready to re-engage, the proctor will need to give the student the PIN number in the chat box. Now, we know that for younger students, we may need to communicate with the caregiver, the guardian, the parents. And this is where we're suggesting, prior to the test, having conversations with your K2 caregivers, parents, saying if the child's device were to have an issue, is there another device in the home, like a cell phone, that we could use to communicate with you and your child? So during the test, you could text that phone or the other device. And that's what we've been hearing, that other schools throughout the country are also doing that protocol. So that PIN number for new proctors is actually on the dashboard in the upper right-hand corner. Oops. So that's the PIN number that the proctor would give to the student to re-engage them back into the test. So I know I just went through a lot. Pam, is there quite a bit of questions? Should I pause?
There are quite a few questions. I'm answering many of them, but why don't you finish and then we'll answer all of them at the end.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So from the test engagement, we also wanted to walk through the Proctor Controls, just to remind us of the various different things that you can select. Now, when a student needs a break, you could pause up to 25 minutes, that student. If the student needs to, when they come back, the teacher, the proctor, would resume that test. So they do have to press resume. Now, if the student doesn't finish the test that day, and or it's been agreed upon that the student is done testing, they would like to just test another day, you could suspend that test, and then when that student is ready for that makeup session, you would then go back in and test them. We do not recommend choosing terminate, because that deletes the test for that student. So again, if you have any questions regarding these controls, let us know, put them in the chat, and we can also add, we have multiple different resources to walk through these various different controls. Let's talk about accommodations. Now, as you set up the test session for your students, if any of your test students need accommodations, that's when you would provide those accommodations. Now, in terms of text-to-speech, what we suggest is for you as the district, as the schools, to have a protocol in place on what students should receive text-to-speech. We've been hearing from many of our partners that they use generally their IEP to guide them on those accommodation pieces. But again, that's really up to you as a district and school to choose and have a protocol in place when students should receive accommodations. Now, earlier, someone asked, how do we know which students would need a retest? Well, in your MARC system, your map growth system, you can run a test history search, and it could be on a whole school, by grade, by instructor, and by individual student now. So you could receive that report on students who met the 30% threshold of disengagement. Now, we point at that 30% threshold for disengagement because typically that's the point where we're saying that potentially, again, this is our thoughts, that student's test score might not be valid, but that's up to you as a school and district to choose what is valid, what is not, what's that threshold. Okay, so to wrap up proctoring, we have a test administration guide, which I know somebody asked about. Well, it's on our website. We can email that to you. It'll be part of this slide deck. You'll receive that. On creating test sessions, there's a hyperlink in there that'll walk you through how to create those test sessions. The device setup, student directions, and how to schedule makeup sessions. So all of those are hyperlinked to our resources, and again, you'll receive this slide deck. Okay, so Pam, thanks for answering those questions. Any that we should address as a whole group?
Yes, so a couple of quick things, and I think probably the most important thing is if you could do this while I'm talking, Jeannie, is take them to the remote testing site and let's just show them where the resources are, because we are getting short on time here and I want to honor everyone's time. But it's really important that, yes, you can test. You are not testing one-on-one. Absolutely. That was probably the biggest question that came in. You are not testing one-on-one. This is a group administration. Now, you could, I'm not saying we recommend it, you could test your whole class at one time, just like you do in school. However, we are suggesting, at least for this first time, if we stay remote all year, gosh, help us, you will get better and better at this and more comfortable, and you will probably hit a point where you can test your whole class. We are suggesting upper middle school and high school kids are probably much better at being in larger test sessions. They're probably much more comfortable with the technology. But your littles, groups of 6, 7, 8, we're seeing being very successful. But you could, it really depends on the teacher, the proctors, as Jeannie said, technology savviness. So the teacher who's very tech savvy, who has a pretty tech savvy class, more kids, you're probably fine. If your teachers are uncomfortable with that technology or uncomfortable, the kids are uncomfortable, you've got really little ones, kindergarten, first grade, you're going to want those to be in smaller test sessions, but definitely not one-to-one.
I just noticed a new thing. We now have how to flag students who are testing remotely. Yes.
Yep.
So again, check this site. I put this link into the chat box. We are constantly updating and posting new resources into this link. So yes, I know we have to wrap up. So just let's see here, troubleshooting, know that we have your back. We have tried to put together common issues that's in our FAQ, and that's what this link goes to. We also are trying to post stories and practices from everybody else in our community page, and lots of videos. So again, you'll receive this slide deck. No worries that that you had to type all this out. So hopefully we'll get this out to you as soon as possible. We have resources for all of our solutions remotely, and that is also in that link that I posted. And just in closing, we highly recommend putting together and using the action plan checklist, because that action plan checklist, which is on that link, will walk you through and hopefully make sure that there's nothing unturned, that you go through everything and prep for this. So these are just a few items that are on that action planner as a checklist for you and your leadership team. Lastly, if there's any questions we didn't get to, feel free to email Pam or I. I know some of your account managers support you. They're involved in other things today, but you send us your questions. We will get hold of your account managers and make sure we get back to you. And lastly, there is a survey that we've created. This survey will allow us to know if there's something we missed. You would like us to contact you individually, and you could let us know if the resources we've provided you are what you need, if there's anything missing. So if you would please take a moment and fill this survey out, we'd greatly appreciate it. All right, we finished by 11:01.
Which we did go very quickly. As those of you who have questions, again, as Jeannie said, just reach out to us at any point in time and let us know your questions or concerns. We're here to help, but please visit that website. We've put it in the chat twice. That website is an amazing resource. You've got proctor resources, parent resources, administrator resources, tech department resources. We have tried to answer every possible question you might have. And if you don't see it, let us know and we will find out for you.
Absolutely.
Have a great day, everybody.
And best wishes for the start of the school year. Thank you for what you do.
And again, thank you, Michelle and Heather. We greatly appreciate it. Have a great school year, everybody.